She stepped off the transport shuttle with a heavy heart. The air was thick and strange, carrying a metallic taste that made her stomach twist. Around her, the world was silent, a kind of quiet that felt unnatural. There were no birds singing, no wind rustling through trees, only the low hum of abandoned machinery half buried in the cracked gray earth. This was the place they called the Forbidden World, a land no one had returned from willingly. Governments had long declared it uninhabitable, and anyone sent here was often treated as though they had already died. Her name was Liana. She was trained, strong and intelligent, but she was not prepared for the emptiness she found. She had been sent here under official orders, a reassignment disguised as a mission. The truth was that she knew too much about what had gone wrong in this place. She had seen reports, documents, and secret files that hinted at negligence, greed, and cover-ups. Her knowledge made her a liability to powerful people who wanted the world to forget. And now, she was here, condemned in silence. With no one expecting her to survive or even return, the first steps were the hardest. The ground cracked beneath her boots, small tremors shaking loose pieces of debris from old buildings. Rusted vehicles sat half buried in the dirt, remnants of a civilization that had tried to tame this land and failed. Liana's eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. She was cautious, knowing that danger could be anywhere, not just from the land itself, but from any remaining automated systems left behind. Machines designed to maintain safety now had no masters, and their failures were deadly. Her first night was the loneliest she had ever experienced. She had expected isolation, but she had not expected it to feel like the world itself had forgotten her. The sky was dark, filled with thick clouds that glowed faintly with unnatural light. The wind carried whispers that sounded almost human, but when she turned, there was nothing. She set up a small camp in the ruins of an old research outpost using the limited supplies she had been given. She ate sparingly and drank only what she could purify from the few remaining water sources. Every sound made her jump. Every movement outside her small shelter made her heart race. Despite the fear, Diana forced herself to explore during the day. She needed to understand the land, to map the ruins, and to find any resources that could keep her alive. The further she walked, the more she realized how carefully the area had been abandoned. It was not just empty. It had been erased. Libraries had been burned, laboratories dismantled, and records destroyed. There were signs of struggle everywhere. Broken tools, overturned containers, even footprints that had long since been covered by dust. It was clear that anyone who had once lived here had tried to survive, but most had failed. She discovered her first clue on the third day. In what had once been a control room, a small terminal flickered with life. Its screen was dusty, its keyboard broken in places, but some of the data was still accessible. Liana's hands trembled as she began to read logs left behind by workers who had tried to evacuate. The messages were short, hurried, and desperate. They spoke of storms that could tear metal apart, of toxic clouds that moved faster than anyone could escape, and of a world that had turned against them. One line made her pause. "If anyone finds this, know that we were abandoned, left to die for their secrets." Her chest tightened. The words confirmed what she had suspected, yet reading them in her own hands made the reality sink deeper. She had been sent here knowing she might never return. She was not just an explorer or an engineer. She was a witness to a place that the world wanted to erase. Every corner she examined, every shadow she passed, reminded her that she was alone. And yet, despite the fear, there was a spark of determination growing inside her. She would not be erased. She would survive, document, and tell the truth. As the days went on, Liana adapted to her new reality. She learned to read the land, noticing patterns in the strange weather and avoiding areas where the ground was unstable. She repaired old tools, scavenged parts from broken machines, and created small systems to collect and purify water. Her body grew stronger, her senses sharper. The loneliness remained, but she filled it with purpose. She began keeping a journal, recording everything she saw, everything she felt. Every sound, every shadow, every strange pattern in the clouds, Nothing was too small to document. There were moments when despair almost overtook her. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly, faster than anything she had ever experienced. Lightning struck the ruins around her camp. She had to cling to the remains of a wall just to avoid being thrown across the broken ground. Rain poured down in sheets, flooding the small channels she had dug to keep her shelter dry. That night, as she shivered in the cold, she thought about the people who had been here before her, about the ones who had vanished without a trace. She felt the weight of the land pressing down on her, testing her resolve. But she also realized that surviving meant more than enduring. It meant learning, adapting, and finding hope where there seemed to be none. By the end of the first week, Liana began to notice subtle signs that she might not be entirely alone. A set of footprints appeared where she had not left any. Small pieces of equipment were moved or repaired without explanation. And sometimes she would hear faint noises in the distance that could have been wind or something else. Her mind raced with possibilities. Could someone else have survived here? Was she imagining it? The uncertainty was terrifying, yet it also sparked a glimmer of curiosity. If she was not entirely alone, then perhaps the land held more than just danger and despair. Perhaps there was a chance for connection, for discovery, for truth. Every night, she stared at the dark sky and thought about the world beyond the forbidden zone. She thought about her family, her friends, and the life she had left behind. She thought about the people who had sent her here, who had condemned her in silence. And she made a silent promise to herself, no matter what happened, she would not let this place define her. She would survive. She would uncover its secrets, and she would make sure that the world knew what had really happened here. By the end of her first month, Liana had learned to move through the land with confidence. She knew which areas were safe, which shelters could protect her from storms, and which machines were still operational. She had discovered old libraries buried under rubble and had begun piecing together the history of the forbidden world. Every discovery brought more questions. Who had lived here? Who had abandoned them? And most importantly, was anyone still alive? The thought of finding another living soul both terrified and excited her. It was a possibility that seemed almost impossible, yet she could not stop herself from hoping. And so, Liana continued to explore, document, and survive. She was alone in a world that had been condemned, in a place that no one wanted to remember. But within her, a quiet strength was growing. She was no longer just a visitor. She was a witness, a survivor, and a seeker of truth. And little did she know, the answers she sought were closer than she could imagine, waiting in a place no record had ever mentioned. The days on the forbidden world stretched endlessly. Each sunrise revealed nothing new, yet each day brought fresh challenges. Liana had learned to survive on her own, but survival in a land that seemed designed to reject life was never simple. The air itself was heavy, carrying dust and strange chemicals that irritated her lungs. She wore a mask most of the time, but even with protection, every breath was a reminder of how dangerous this place was. Every step she took could lead her to a collapse, a hidden sinkhole, or a storm she could not outrun. Water had become her first priority. The old systems for collecting and purifying water were mostly broken, and she had to improvise. She found containers left behind by researchers, patched holes with scraps of metal and cloth, and created small channels to collect rainwater. Each day, she monitored these sources carefully. Contaminated water could make her sick in hours. One misstep could mean a fever, dehydration, or worse. Despite the constant fear, she felt pride in her growing skill. She had become a master of survival, learning to anticipate the land's dangers before they struck. Food was harder to come by. The few plants that grew were twisted and bitter, often contaminated by chemicals from long-abandoned laboratories. She learned to identify what was safe and what was not through careful observation and small tests. Some days, she went without eating, rationing her supplies to stretch them as far as possible. Her body grew leaner and stronger at the same time. She moved faster now, climbed higher, and navigated the ruined landscape with a confidence that came from months of trial and error. The land itself seemed alive, though not in the way anyone would want. Toxic storms whipped across the plains without warning, carrying debris and chemicals that could burn through clothing. The wind howled like a predator hunting its prey. Sometimes strange noises echoed across the empty ruins, clangs, bangs, and screeches that made her heart race. At first she thought she was imagining things, but soon she realized the land had a rhythm, a pattern that could be read if one was careful enough. She began to recognize the signs of storms before they arrived. The subtle changes in the ground that warned of shifting debris or sinkholes. Each discovery made her more confident, but the danger never fully disappeared. Even as she focused on survival, Liana's mind was restless. The isolation was crushing. She spoke to herself, read old journals she had found, and kept meticulous notes on her surroundings. She drew maps of the area, noting landmarks, hazards, and any signs of past life. The journals from researchers who had lived here before her were haunting. Their words revealed fear, desperation, and sometimes hope. They tried to survive as she did, and reading about their struggles both inspired and terrified her. The idea that someone else had walked these paths before, and perhaps perished without anyone ever knowing, weighed heavily on her. Then one day she noticed something unusual. A small metal container had been moved from where she had left it. At first, she thought it was her own doing. She had been reorganizing supplies, but she soon realized it had been tampered with. Someone or something had been here. Her heart raced. She scanned the area, listening carefully. There was nothing, but the footprints in the mud confirmed her suspicion. They were human, fresh, and they led to a collapsed building she had not yet explored. Her mind spun with questions. Could she be imagining things? Was she finally seeing signs of life beyond her own? Her curiosity won over her fear. She followed the footprints carefully, moving slowly and quietly. Every step felt like a gamble. The building was half destroyed, walls leaning precariously, metal beams twisted like paper. Inside, she found a small workshop. Tools had been used recently, and a few scraps of food had been eaten. Whoever had been here knew how to survive. Liana's heart raced with hope. She had expected to be alone forever. But now the possibility of encountering another human being filled her, a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She spent hours searching the building, looking for more clues. She found journals carefully hidden under floor panels that described the life of a lone survivor. He had been here for years, living off what the land allowed him to scavenge and repair. His entries were methodical, sometimes detailed, sometimes just single lines marking the passing of time. He wrote about storms, collapsing structures, and the struggle to stay alive. But he also wrote about hope, hope that someone might find him, hope that the world beyond the forbidden zone might one day learn the truth. Liana felt a connection she had not expected. She was no longer just surviving for herself. She was part of a story that someone else had been living too. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of companionship, if it was only on paper. She left messages of her own, hoping that if he returned, he would find them. She wrote carefully, describing her presence, her skills, and her intentions. She left supplies she had scavenged, creating small traps to alert her if anyone entered the workshop again. The uncertainty was painful. She had to remind herself to stay calm, to not let hope turn into recklessness. Every day was a balance between survival and connection, between fear and curiosity. As days turned into weeks, she began to notice other signs. Small repairs were made to her own shelter. Items she had left outside were moved closer or organized. She was not alone. The thought filled her with equal parts relief and tension. Whoever it was, they were watching her. They could be dangerous, but they could also be an ally. Liana learned to trust her instincts, reading the signs left behind and preparing for the moment when they would finally meet. She knew it could come at any time, and she wanted to be ready. The encounter finally came on a late afternoon when the sun was low, painting the sky in orange and red streaks. She saw a figure moving across the broken landscape, cautious and deliberate. Her heart pounded. The figure stopped, equally cautious, and watched her. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, they approached each other. Words were exchanged carefully at first, polite and cautious. The survivor's name was Elias, and he had been living here long before Liana arrived. His knowledge of the land was astonishing, and he shared tips on how to avoid hidden dangers, how to predict storms, and how to find safe sources of water and food. Despite their mutual caution, a bond began to form. They shared stories of survival, of the hardships they had endured, and the small victories that kept them going. Liana learned that Elias had not only survived, but had been observing the ruins for years, piecing together the events that had led to the world's abandonment. He had evidence of the failures and secrets that no government wanted exposed. Together, they realized that the land held more than danger. It held the truth. And now, together, they could uncover it. Even with the partnership forming, the forbidden world remained relentless. Storms still arrived without warning. Strange noises still echoed through the ruins, and every step remained risky. But Liana felt stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. The isolation that had once crushed her spirit was replaced by cautious optimism. She was no longer alone, and with Elias by her side, the land felt slightly less impossible. They developed routines, shared duties, and slowly, carefully, built a life in the ruins that had once been a graveyard. By the end of the second month, Liana had transformed her approach. Survival was no longer just about escaping danger. It was about learning the land, documenting it, and preparing for the day they could reveal its secrets. Together, she and Elias created detailed maps, recorded the ruins, and cataloged every discovery. They spoke of leaving someday, of transmitting the truth to the world, but they knew that leaving too soon could be fatal. For now, they survived, adapted, and hoped. The forbidden world was still harsh and unforgiving, but it had changed. It was no longer just a place of despair for Liana. It was a place of learning, discovery, and human connection. The knowledge that she was not entirely alone, that someone had survived before and now survived with her, gave her a sense of purpose stronger than fear. And deep in her heart, she sensed that the most important discoveries were still ahead. Liana had never imagined that a place as desolate as the forbidden world could hold life, but it did. And not just life, but someone who had survived against all odds. Elias had lived here alone for years, learning the rhythms of the land and adapting to its dangers. Now, with Liana by his side, their combined knowledge made survival feel slightly less impossible. But it was not just survival that occupied their thoughts. As they explored further, it became clear that the ruins held secrets no one was meant to uncover, truths that had been buried when the world had chosen to abandon this land. One morning, Liana awoke to the sound of Elias moving quietly outside the shelter. The sky was overcast, and a faint mist clung to the cracked ground. He was examining a collapsed laboratory nearby, pointing out details she might have missed on her own. "Look here," he said, crouching beside a rusted control panel. This wasn't just research. Someone wanted to erase the truth, to cover up what happened here. Curiosity burned in Liana's chest. She leaned closer, brushing away layers of dust to reveal faded markings and warning signs. The lab had been involved in experiments with chemicals and environmental controls, all of which had failed catastrophically. Notes scrawled in the margins of reports hinted at attempts to manipulate the land, to create systems that could control it, but they had gone horribly wrong. Entire areas had been poisoned, abandoned, and deliberately erased from records. Reading the logs, Liana felt a chill. The forbidden world had not simply failed. It had been silenced. Elias shared stories of what he had discovered over the years. Machines left behind had been designed to maintain safety, but they were poorly programmed and dangerous. Automated systems had failed during storms, causing widespread destruction. He told her about workers who had been trapped, left behind during evacuations, and about researchers who had disappeared without a trace. The journals they had found painted a grim picture. A world where greed, secrecy, and fear had led to a catastrophe no one wanted to admit. Liana listened intently, realizing that her presence here was not a coincidence. She was meant to uncover this truth. Even if those who sent her hoped she would not, days turned into weeks as they explored more of the ruins. Every corner held new clues, half-buried machines, shredded papers, and containers marked with warnings. Liana began piecing together a timeline. The first experiments had seemed promising, but errors compounded over time. Safety protocols were ignored, and disasters that could have been prevented were left unaddressed. Eventually, the authorities chose to abandon the area entirely, labeling it forbidden and pretending everyone had died. But Elias had survived, hidden from the world, and now Liana had arrived to witness it. Their discoveries were not without danger. Some areas still held chemical residues, unstable structures, and automated machinery that could activate without warning. On more than one occasion, Liana narrowly avoided falling debris or inhaling toxic fumes. Elias taught her how to read the signs, how to move carefully, and how to anticipate hidden threats. Their partnership was built not only on trust, but on the unspoken understanding that mistakes could be fatal. Each day, Liana felt herself becoming more attuned to the land, learning to see patterns in the chaos and discovering ways to adapt that she had never imagined. One afternoon, as they explored a deeper section of a research facility, they found something extraordinary. Hidden beneath rubble was a small room with intact data servers. The machines were old, but some still held power, humming faintly beneath layers of dust. Liana's hands shook as she connected her own portable device, eager to access the files. What she found made her gasp. Detailed logs documented every experiment, every failure, and most importantly, every cover-up. Names of officials, dates, and confidential communications revealed that the disaster had not been accidental. It had been manipulated, deliberately hidden from the public to protect reputations and profits. Elias watched her reaction carefully. "This is why I survived," he said quietly. "I knew the world would try to erase it all. Someone has to remember." The weight of their discovery pressed on Liana. The files contained not just technical data, but evidence of human choices, of lies and neglect that had caused irreversible damage. She realized the significance of their find. If they could transmit this information to the outside world, the truth could no longer be ignored. But doing so was dangerous. The forbidden world was monitored in ways they did not fully understand. Sending a signal might attract attention, and the people who wanted this land forgotten could come after them. Yet the thought of keeping silent was unbearable. She had survived too much, and now she held the power to expose the truth. As the days passed, Liana and Elias developed a careful routine. They explored new sections of the ruins in the mornings, paired and scavenged supplies in the afternoons, and analyzed data at night. They shared stories of their lives before the forbidden world, memories of family, its friends, and ordinary days that now felt distant. These moments of human connection strengthened them, creating a bond that went beyond survival. For the first time, Liana felt hope not just for herself, but for the possibility of justice, for the chance to tell the story of those who had been abandoned. The land, however, remained unpredictable. Toxic storms still rolled in without warning, and the ground often shifted beneath their feet. On one occasion, they narrowly escaped a collapsing platform that had once held experimental equipment. The near-death experience reminded them that the forbidden world was unforgiving, and that every decision mattered. Liana's respect for Elias grew. He had survived years alone here by reading the land, anticipating danger, and adapting constantly. Now, with her presence, their chances of survival increased, but so did the risks. They could not afford complacency. Late one evening, while reviewing the data logs, they discovered something even more surprising. A single entry referenced another survivor, a technician left behind in a remote section of the forbidden world. Liana's pulse quickened. Could there be someone else? A person who had endured the same isolation. Someone who had lived in the shadows, waiting to be found. The entry contained coordinates and a faint description, but the information was old. They had no guarantee that the survivor was still alive. Still, the possibility ignited a new determination. Liana felt that discovering this person could be the key to understanding the full story of the forbidden world. Over the next several days, they prepared for the journey to find the lone survivor. Supplies were packed, routes were mapped, and safety measures were carefully considered. Liana's excitement was tempered by caution. The terrain was harsh, and even small mistakes could be fatal. Elias reminded her that they had already faced the worst the land could throw at them. but he also knew that the unknown was always more dangerous than what they had seen. Together, they set out, moving slowly and carefully, their senses alert to every sound, every shadow, every potential threat. The journey tested them in ways they had not anticipated. The landscape shifted constantly, and hidden hazards forced them to take long detours. Storms appeared without warning, forcing them to take shelter in precarious ruins. Supplies dwindled, and exhaustion crept into their movements. Yet with every step, they grew stronger, not just physically, but mentally. Liana learned to rely on her instincts, to trust Ilias's knowledge, and to adapt quickly to unforeseen circumstances. She realized that survival here was as much about strategy and patience as it was about strength. Finally, after days of careful travel, they reached the coordinates indicated in the old log. The site was a partially collapsed research station hidden behind natural rock formations. Every instinct screamed caution, yet hope surged through Liana's chest. She could sense that they were close. They approached slowly, scanning for signs of life. Then, they saw a faint movement among the debris, almost imperceptible at first. Liana's heart raced. The Forbidden World had not only tested her, but it had also led her to this moment. Someone had survived. Someone had endured the same trials, and now, for the first time, she was about to meet them. The movement among the debris revealed a figure, thin and cautious, with eyes that reflected years of isolation and struggle. Liana and Elias exchanged a glance, both sensing the weight of this moment. After years of loneliness, the Forbidden World had given them another human being, someone who had survived the impossible. The survivor's name was Kale, and his story was almost as extraordinary as Liana's and Elias's combined experiences. He had been a technician, left behind when the authorities evacuated the area, officially listed as dead. For years, he had lived in hiding, scavenging, and adapting, waiting for someone to arrive who might finally understand the truth of this land. The first interaction was tense. Trust had to be earned slowly in a place where one wrong move could be fatal. Kale spoke cautiously, eyes scanning for threats, voice low and deliberate. Liana introduced herself, explaining why she was here, what she had discovered, and how she had survived. Elias supported her, sharing his own years of experience and the discoveries they had made together. Slowly, the tension eased. Kale recognized that they were not a threat, but allies who could help expose the secrets of the Forbidden World. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to relax slightly, showing the faintest hint of a smile. Over the next few days, they worked together to explore the station where Kale had been hiding. It was a small but well-organized shelter, cleverly constructed to withstand storms, with hidden water and food storage, and carefully maintained systems for survival. Kale had learned to improvise, repairing old machines and using discarded parts to maintain his shelter. Liana and Elias were amazed at his ingenuity. He had lived here alone, relying entirely on his knowledge and determination, and yet he had survived. The three of them now formed a team, combining skills and knowledge to explore further and uncover more of the Forbidden World secrets. Their first major discovery came when Kale led them to a hidden archive deep beneath the collapsed research station. The entrance was almost invisible, disguised by rubble and natural growth, but Kale had maintained it over the years. Inside were rows of old data storage devices, carefully organized, containing records from the earliest experiments to the final days before the land was abandoned. Liana's hands shook as she began examining the files. These were not just logs, they were proof. Proof of the failures, proof of the deliberate cover-ups, proof that the disaster had been avoidable but was intentionally concealed. The more they read, the clearer the picture became. The Forbidden World had been an experiment in environmental control, intended to manipulate the land and natural resources. Early tests showed promise, but corners were cut, warnings were ignored, and mistakes were hidden. The final disasters were catastrophic, spreading contamination and destruction that forced the area to be evacuated. But the evacuation itself had been incomplete, leaving workers and technicians behind. These survivors had been erased from records, their existence denied. The files revealed the names of those responsible for the cover-up, along with internal communications showing a deliberate attempt to hide the truth from the public. Liana felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and determination. The world had a right to know what had happened here, Cale explained. How he had discovered the archives years ago and had maintained them, waiting for someone who could help expose the truth. Elias added context, filling in gaps with his knowledge of the land, the experiments, and the few survivors who had been left behind. Together, the three of them pieced together a timeline of events, reconstructing what had been lost or destroyed in official records. Every new discovery revealed more about the scale of the disaster and the deliberate choices that had caused it. It was overwhelming, but also empowering. They were no longer just survivors. They were witnesses, custodians of the truth. The challenge now was how to share the information. They had no direct contact with the outside world, and any attempt to transmit data risked detection. The authorities who had abandoned the land still monitored certain zones. They could not be sure what would happen if a signal was sent. But Cale, Liana, and Elias agreed that hiding the truth was no longer an option. They devised a plan to send the most critical information in stages. Using improvised transmitters and carefully encrypted files, each attempt had to be precise, timed to avoid storms and minimize the chance of interference. Meanwhile, their daily lives were still consumed by survival. The land remained unforgiving, with sudden toxic storms, unstable terrain, and unpredictable hazards. Each day required careful planning, cooperation, and constant vigilance. They rotated duties collecting water, repairing shelters, gathering data, and monitoring the environment. The work was exhausting, but it strengthened their bond. They learned to anticipate each other's movements, to communicate without words, and to trust instincts honed by years of survival. Liana realized that their combined skills made them far more capable than any one of them alone. Together, they could endure almost anything the forbidden world could throw at them. One evening, after a long day of exploration, they gathered in the main shelter to review newly recovered files. Among them was evidence of a final secret experiment conducted just before the area was officially condemned. The project had been hidden even from most of the researchers, and its failure had contributed directly to the abandonment of the zone. The files detailed environmental manipulations, chemical dispersals, and experiments on land restoration that had gone catastrophically wrong. Reading the logs, Liana felt a chill. The consequences of these experiments had not only destroyed the land, but it also risked countless lives. The knowledge that the disaster had been preventable added weight to their mission. Cale spoke quietly, almost to himself. All of this, if people knew, it could change everything. But who would believe it? Who would care after all these years? Liana looked at him firmly. We survived. That alone makes us proof. And these files, they can't be ignored. We have to try. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly on the transmission plan. Liana and Elias repaired and reinforced old antennas, scavenged components from abandoned stations, and tested signal strength. Cale carefully selected the files to send first enough to prove the disaster and the cover-up, without revealing everything at once. They prepared for multiple attempts, knowing that failure could mean losing all progress or attracting unwanted attention. Despite the risk, their determination was unshakable. They understood that exposing the truth was more important than safety, though they balanced courage with caution. The first transmission was nerve-wracking. They waited until a storm had passed, checked the equipment meticulously, and finally sent a brief encrypted signal containing critical evidence of the cover-up. The air felt heavy as they listened for signs of response, though none came immediately. Hours passed, then a day. Finally, a faint acknowledgement appeared, a confirmation that the message had been received by a secure, distant network. Relief washed over them, followed by renewed determination. If the first message could get through, the rest could follow. With the initial success, their confidence grew. They continued to document, organize, and transmit data in careful stages. Each successful transmission brought them closer to exposing the truth, but also reminded them of the stakes. They were still alone in a hostile land, and any mistake could be fatal. Yet the bond between them, Liana, Elias, and Kale, remained unbreakable. They relied on each other not just for survival, for the strength to confront the enormity of their task. In quiet moments, they reflected on what they had endured. The forbidden world had tested them in unimaginable ways. It had taken away comfort, safety, and companionship. It had forced them to adapt, to fight, and to endure. Yet it had also brought them together, forged a bond stronger than fear or despair, and revealed the truth that others had tried to erase. Liana realized that their struggle was not just about survival. It was about justice, memory, and the courage to confront lies that had endured for years. As Part 4 drew to a close, Liana, Elias, and Kale knew that the most difficult challenges were yet to come. They had uncovered the truth and begun the process of transmitting it to the outside world. They had found strength in each other and resilience in themselves. But the forbidden world was still a place of danger, secrets, and unpredictability. Their journey was far from over, and the consequences of their discoveries would reach beyond the borders of the land they had survived. The days after their initial transmissions were tense and filled with anticipation. Liana, Elias, and Kale continued their careful work, sending files and evidence in stages, knowing that each message carried both hope and risk. The forbidden world was still unpredictable. Storms could appear without warning, and the land itself seemed to resist their progress. But now, with the possibility of reaching the outside world, they felt a purpose greater than mere survival. Every day, the truth moved a step closer to being revealed. And every night, their bond grew stronger. They spent hours monitoring the equipment, checking transmissions, and documenting the responses. The acknowledgement of receipt from the first batch of evidence had been a small victory, but it fueled their determination. Each piece of data they sent carried proof of abandonment, corruption, and cover-ups that had been hidden for years. For the first time since arriving, Liana felt that their struggle had meaning beyond simply staying alive. They were about to make the world face what had been ignored, forgotten, or deliberately erased. The trio took turns on duties, carefully balancing survival with the urgency of their mission. Elias monitored the terrain, mapping safe paths and avoiding unstable zones. Kale ensured the transmission equipment was functional, improvising repairs with spare parts scavenged from abandoned stations. Liana coordinated the data, cross-referencing files and verifying the authenticity of the records. Their collaboration was seamless, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. The combination of their skills gave them a sense of control in a world that had always been chaotic and hostile. One morning, as the sun struggled to break through thick clouds, Liana noticed a faint light flickering in the distance, something that was not a storm. She pointed it out to Elias and Kale. They moved cautiously, following the light while remaining alert for any hidden dangers. As they approached, they realized it was a communication beacon, a signal indicating that a team had received their transmissions and was attempting to respond. Relief and excitement surged through Liana's chest. After months of isolation, months of danger, and uncertainty, the outside world was finally acknowledging their presence. The response was not immediate confirmation of safety, but it was a start. Secure lines were opened, allowing them to send larger batches of data and even short messages to verify the accuracy of what had been transmitted. Liana carefully explained the situation, summarizing the disaster, the abandonment, the cover-ups they had uncovered. Kale provided technical details, and Elias shared the first-hand experience of surviving in the forbidden world. The outside team listened, asking questions and verifying information, amazed at the level of detail and the courage required to survive in such a hostile environment. With communication established, Liana felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The hardest part was over, yet the process of exposing the full truth was just beginning. The outside world had to understand the scale of the disaster and the deliberate actions that had led to it. Governments, companies, and officials who had tried to erase the history of the forbidden world would not be pleased. Liana understood that this work might provoke resistance, denial, or even attempts to silence them again. But she also knew that they had survived too long and learned too much to be ignored. Days became a rhythm of careful preparation, transmission, and survival. Storms tested their shelters, toxic winds pushed them to move quickly, and the land itself reminded them that it was not yet tamed. Despite the challenges, progress continued. Every successful transmission strengthened their resolve. Liana began to imagine the impact their evidence would have on the world beyond. Stories of those who had been abandoned, the scientists who had disappeared, and the environmental catastrophe that had been hidden were finally going to be told. The thought of justice, recognition, and truth filled her with a sense of accomplishment that no danger could diminish. Then, the day came when the response team announced they were sending a rescue operation. Liana, Elias, and Kale prepared carefully, ensuring that all evidence was secure and that their shelters could be left intact temporarily. For the first time in years, Liana allowed herself to feel anticipation instead of fear. The outside world, which had seemed distant and indifferent, was coming to acknowledge their existence and their discoveries. The thought of finally leaving the forbidden world was exhilarating, yet bittersweet. This land had shaped them, tested them, and forged their resilience. Leaving it would mean stepping away from the place that had defined their struggle. The rescue operation arrived cautiously, equipped with specialists, safety equipment, and advanced technology to navigate the dangerous terrain. Liana watched as teams moved through the ruins, guided by her maps and knowledge. The moment was surreal. Years of isolation, danger, and uncertainty culminated in a cautious but steady advance of people from the world she had thought had forgotten her. She felt a deep sense of relief, but also pride. She had survived. She had endured. And now, she had the chance to make the world understand what had really happened here, as they left the forbidden world. Liana reflected on the journey. She remembered the first day she had arrived, the desolation, the fear, and the realization that she had been condemned. She thought of the long nights spent alone, scavenging, learning, and adapting. She remembered the first signs of another person. The cautious meeting with Elias, and then the discovery of Kale. Every moment had been a test, every day a challenge. Yet through it all, she had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. The forbidden world had tried to erase her, but she had survived not just physically, but in spirit. Upon returning to the outside world, the evidence they carried began to have an immediate impact. Media outlets, scientists, and officials examined the data, confirming the scale of the disaster and the deliberate attempts to cover it up. Public awareness grew quickly, and discussions about responsibility, environmental ethics, and accountability followed. Liana's role was recognized not just as a survivor, but as a witness whose courage had made truth unavoidable. Her testimony, combined with the first-hand experiences of Elias and Kale, transformed the way the disaster was understood. The impact went beyond recognition. Policies were reviewed, investigations were reopened, and the names of those responsible for the cover-up were brought to light. Environmental protocols were strengthened to prevent similar disasters, and the stories of the workers who had been abandoned were finally acknowledged. Liana, Elias, and Kale had not only survived, they had changed the way the world remembered and acted. Their courage and determination had ensured that the forbidden world's lessons would not be forgotten. In quiet moments, Liana often reflected on the transformation she had undergone. From the fear and isolation of her first days to the discovery of companionship and knowledge and purpose, she realized that the forbidden world had shaped her in ways she could never have imagined. She had faced death, despair, and silence, and emerged with strength, wisdom, and resilience. The land that had seemed so cruel had also taught her courage, patience, and the power of truth. Even after leaving, she felt a connection to the land. Liana continued to document her experiences, writing detailed accounts and creating maps for future researchers. She knew that the lessons of the forbidden world extended beyond the immediate disaster. They were about the resilience of humans, the importance of truth, and the responsibility to remember those who had been forgotten. Her work became a bridge between the past and the future, a way to ensure that the stories of survival, courage, and truth would endure. Liana. Elias and Cale remained close, their bond forged through shared struggle and triumph. They traveled, spoke, and shared their experiences with those willing to listen, inspiring others with their story of survival and determination. They became living proof that even when the world condemns you, even when life seems impossible, courage, collaboration, and truth can prevail. And so, the story of the Forbidden World, once silenced and erased, became known. Liana had survived the impossible, uncovered the truth, and ensured that the world would remember. She had been condemned, yet she emerged not just alive, but as a witness to history. The land that had tried to erase her became the stage for her courage, and her journey became a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, truth and perseverance can shine through.